Welcome once again to Enharmony, a space to listen deeply to the harmonias of life, the harmonias of true reality, what we know as the Tree of Lives, which has a music in its own. So I'm going to develop today this sense of the harmonia inside the tree. A person asked for this theme, so I'm going to expand the information of the harmonics. Remember that you have the video which I entitled IEO, IAUE, the vowels that represent the flow of harmonics. And today I'm going to present an information that I haven't seen developed in detail anywhere, even though I am convinced that many people know this information, but it's complicated to explain. So let's start with something very basic, as the structure of a piano, for instance, tuned with 432 Hz in middle A, which is closer to the natural tuning. And keep in mind that a piano has 7 octaves. Each octave has 7 notes in the main scale, and the 8th is the repetition of the first. The octave in total has 12 semitones, and these 12 semitones can be seen as the expression of the 12 fruits of the Tree of Lives, the 12 aspects of the cosmos, the 12 phases of a dodecahedron, the 12 nerves in the brain, and so on. Now we also have the so-called 13th sphere, which is that sphere that contains all aspects as one. And we see this 13th sphere represented in the 8th note of the octave, plus the 5 remaining notes. In total they give 13, 8 plus 5, 13, and this is just the first approximation. Then we have a very interesting aspect, which is how the full octave is built up with intervals, all of which are contained in the so-called harmonic series. If you recall, the harmonics are pure tones contained in one single note, and they always flow in a spiral following intervals, the first of which was the octave, the second was the 5th, and so on. But the most interesting thing about this is that each interval is like a mirror. For instance, if you take the octave, the first is repeated or mirrored in the second note, which vibrates twice as much as the first. Then we have the following interval, which can be inverted as well. We put the note on the bass on top, then that perfect 5th becomes a perfect 4th. 5 is mirrored in 4. The following interval in the harmonic series was the major third, and the major third can be also inverted. Then we put the bottom note on the top, and then we get a perfect 6th. We do the same with the following interval, which is the whole tone, and we invert it, and we get a perfect 7th, like in a 7th chord. When we invert the 7th in turn, we get another second. So we have that the 1 is mirrored in the 8th, the 5th is mirrored in the 4th, the 3rd is mirrored in the 6th, the 6th is mirrored in the 3rd, the 2nd is mirrored in the 7th, and the 7th in turn is mirrored in the 2nd. And this is very important to understand, because now we can look at nature with different eyes. When we pay close attention, we realize that everything in nature moves in spirals, which are actually the unfoldment of harmonics. The harmonic series itself is a spiral, and this spiral has a very peculiar characteristic, which is the so-called golden proportion, the golden section that we find in galaxies, in the growth of our hair around the crown, the growth of rings in a tree, the growth of leaves around the tree. Everything grows following this golden proportion, which is expressed with the number 1.618, which is just a decimal approximation. In geometry, this is seen as the large segment is to the short segment, what the full segment is to the large segment. We find that proportion in the body. If you divide the body from the belly, you get that proportion. The larger part is to the lesser part, what the full body is to the larger part. And this is also expressed in a famous numeric sequence known as the Fibonacci sequence, that most people start at 1, but in reality it begins with 0, because 0 represents the space in which the divine being emanates the love, the life, where energy moves. If there is no space, there is no flow. Within the space grows the first seed of love, which mirrors itself, then doubles itself, and then this duplication or doubling is united back again into unity, generating 3. 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 3 is 8, 8 plus 5 is 13, and so on. That would be the famous Fibonacci sequence, explained in a different, more intuitive way. Most mathematicians would say that the Fibonacci sequence is an irrational sequence, that it has no pattern, and that's completely false, because when we reduce the numbers with 2, 3, 4 or more ciphers, then we get a series of 24 numbers that repeat all over again. You can do the calculation and you'll find that truth. And we can actually see how this matches perfectly circumference divided in 24 equal sections, in which we can write the numbers, and then we get the harmonic mirrors, which I've shown before. Notice how 1 goes with 8, the unison gets mirrored in the octave, the 2, the second, is inverted giving the 7th, the 3 is inverted giving the 6th, the 5 is inverted giving the 4th, and so on. And this is what we see in the spirals. One side is mirrored in the other, and we can find this in the hands. The right hand is a perfect mirror of the left hand. Above and below, right and left, are just mirrored images, and this is how the universe expands. Now there is another characteristic which is known as the law of vibration. A famous physician known as Nikola Tesla said that in order to understand the universe, we must think in terms of energy, frequency and vibration. This means that the higher the frequency of vibration of the pure light, the more aliveness, the more energy there is. The lesser is the frequency of vibration, the denser the energy becomes. So there is more materialization, so to say. In poetic terms, we can say that in the true universe of life, the spirit materializes and matter spiritualizes, or is spiritualized, vivified. It becomes more alive. And here we see two movements. When we represent the spiral going to the left, this is known as Levogeurus movement, then we are moving away from the one source. And when we move to the right, tracing the Destroyerus movement, then we go back to the one. Obviously, we must think in 5 dimensions, seeing these diagrams, not in 2 dimensions. The 4th is the movement, the time, and the 5th dimension is the evolution, the growth, which is made possible by 2 vortexes that we can represent as follows. Notice how in the series that we have seen there are 3 numbers, 9, 3 and 6, 3, 9 and 6. This can be represented as 2 vortexes, one going up and another going down, and this is actually the union of spirit or magnetic pure light and the matter that is just the condensation or materialization of that light. In the true reality there is no division between spirit and matter. Investigating this deeply I realized that the 9 is the accumulation of energy, the growth of energy, which must flow with conscience, the power of conscience, the union of subject and object, inner and outer, the reconciliation of the opposites. That's basically the law of 3, union of body and mind, which generates the soul, the divine soul, which is a personality, an individuality expression of the original one. Remember how in previous videos I said that divine soul in Hebrew is known as Neshama, whose numeric value is exactly the same as the numeric value of Hashemayim, translated as the heavens, which is the union of the fire of conscience, Shin, and the waters of life, Ma'im. Then we get the vapor, the spirit, the vivification, spiritualization of matter, which is actually that manifestation of the divine soul, represented by the 6, the inner and outer coming together. And this is how energy flows from the center towards the perimeter and from the perimeter towards the center without division. Then we get the 2 vortexes, 9, 3, 6, 9, 3, 6. And this is why Nikola Tesla also said that if we were able to understand the magnificence and importance of 3, 6 and 9, we would have the key to the universe. And a wise man called Heraclitus, a Greek sage, said that the way up and the way down are one and the same in true reality. The problem is that in our particular segment of the universe, energy does not flow. The law is stagnated because there is no conscience, and therefore the soul is not developed. And this lack of flow, this stagnation, is exactly what we find mirrored in the conventional depictions of the tree of life, which is not the tree of life, it's just a symbiotic tree, incomplete. It lacks the union of wisdom and understanding. It lacks that normally. And as you can see, it can be represented as dimensions. Keter, the crown, could be dimension 0. Chokmah, Binah, or wisdom and understanding, would be the first dimension. The second dimension or plane would be mercy, force and beauty, Chesed, Geburah and Tiferet. Then we would have the 3D, our 3-dimensional solid world, which is represented like a pyramid upside down. Netzach, Od, Yesod and Malkut. Success, splendor, the sphere of growth, and the kingdom which is not a kingdom as we are going to see. In this case it's a kingdom of death, because the fallen humanities that rule our present humanity live in the 4th dimension. We don't see them, And there are also gigantic beings, architects that govern the movements of the planet and stars. So they are in charge of the power of time. This is why we are trapped in this 3D world. So we must understand the Sephirotic tree, bringing into our awareness the mirrors, the harmonic mirrors. And we don't start in Keter because someone must open the space. Keter is that openness in which there is distribution of love, life, where conscience can grow. And that space is the number 0, but all begins in 1. Actually, this is already the manifestation of another openness. The Absolute, known in Hebrew as Ein Sof, the infinite being, opens a space generating a seed of unicity. That's the first of the 12 inner spheres, which we can call finality, Ratzon in Hebrew. Even Paul Shaul said that the Messiah, the anointed one, the one who is anointed with love, life, conscience and serenity, is the finality of the teaching of light, means translated as law. Here we are not talking about any law, because the law is a wall, read it backwards. We are rather expressing a goal, a seed that must grow. Even the Kabbalist Isaac Luria said that the Adam Kadmon, the primordial man, is above Keter. Actually, the primordial man, which is actually identified with the Messiah in Jewish Kabbalah, opens a space in turn, doing the same as the Ein Sof, as the infinite being. It actually is the first expression of the infinite being, and in doing so, it generates wisdom, the spark of intuition, which is like a son growing within the father, but the son becomes in turn father because it sees himself in the so-called manifestation. This is why wisdom goes into understanding of life, Bina, the binary aspect of life, which is reconciled by conscience, represented by 3. This is that, usually translated as knowledge, which is not accurate because knowledge does not lead to the development of consciousness and is not comparable to integrated conscience. Then we would have the expansive side of the universe, Chesed, the mercy, which is curiously very well represented by the 4, because 4 are the cardinal points towards which the energy expands. But musically speaking, we can think in terms of chords with 4 notes, like the so-called dominant chord, which I don't like to call it so, because dominant comes from dominus, from domination, and this is not domination but donation. So I call it the 7th of donation. This is a 7th chord, and the 7th chord leads us to resolve to a more stable chord, which in turn can be converted into another 7th chord, leading to another stable chord, and we do the same. That chord of donation leads us to resolve in more stable chords, and in music this is known as the resolution of 5th, which is mirrored, as you can see. And the 5th contains also wisdom, because we can generate the 12 semitones by stacking 5ths on top of each other. This is what Pythagoras did more than 2000 years ago, and this is a delimitation. This is why we find the 5th aspect in the sphere of Geura, force, which is also known as justice, even though I don't like that name, but it expresses the structure, the limit that must have life. Life cannot always expand because it must flow through the points of lesser resistance, and this requires a structure. Then we have the number 6 on the sphere of Tiferet, beauty, which is actually a mirror of conscience. In Tiferet we have the expression of the divine soul, and the more conscience grows, the more our divine soul expands, and the more love we express. 3 plus 6, 9. That's the sphere of Yesod, the sphere of fructification, growth, which is actually the accumulation of creative energy, life, love, and it must flow with this symmetry, otherwise it becomes the energy of the serpent, very destructive. This flow with the middle column, 369, is what helps us find success as well, that we see in the sphere of Netzach, so-called victory, which is the inversion, the mirror of understanding, Bina. The more understanding we have, the more success we have. And the mirror of wisdom is a splendor, or the manifestation of consciousness and light, which also gives a structure. This is why it's in the column of the force and Bina. The octaves are also a delimitation. There are 7 octaves in one piano. And finally we have the so-called sphere of Malkut, known as kingdom, but in the Tree of Life it's not a kingdom, it's rather an olarchy. It's not a monarchy, it's an olarchy, which is a composite of olons. Olons are expressions of the whole, the primordial unity, which lacks nothing. Olon comes from the Greek holos, complete. And it's actually the 12th aspect, even though it's represented with the union of 1 and 0, which is actually the completion. The seed of the finality is finally developed, integrated, but altogether are 12 aspects if you count, and they all are contained and come from the 13th sphere, which is the totality, the I amness. And curiously, 13 is also the expression of 4. 1 plus 3 is 4. Actually 3 is a creative number in itself, and it gives birth to a 4th aspect, which can be represented as the 4th aspects of the tetragrammaton Yud Hei Vav Hei, the qualities of love, pure life, conscience, and infinite serenity. Notice how this is the manifestation of love through 3 bodies: the mental body of conscience, the emotional body of life, and the expressive body of serenity. 3 bodies that have to grow in ourselves, following the octaves. Actually, if you have a look to the diagram that we saw before, from 9 to 3 there is one segment, from 3 to 6 there is another segment, and from 6 to 9 there is a third segment, and each segment has 7 steps. That would be 3 octaves of development: the body of expression, the body of emotions, and the body of mind, that developed, manifesting the 4th body of love, the invisible body that has to be manifested in each one of us. This is how we become anointed with love, life, light, and serenity. We are thus cells of the primordial man, the Adan Katmon. And this is also expressed in sacred languages. If we go to Greek gematria, we find out that Christos gives a value of 1480, which gives 13 when we sum it up. And don't forget that Christos means anointed with love, life, conscience, and serenity. but only in this case, because there are also false messiahs, false anointed ones. And notice how Jesus alone has a value of 888, which add to 24, and 24 are the 24 harmonics in the spirals of the Fibonacci sequence, or the spirals in the harmonic series. And this is why in the video of harmonics I said that Yesos contains the sacred vowels Yeo that give the movement of the harmonic series. Yeo or Yahuwah, it depends, but those vowels are contained in sacred names such as Yehoshua, Yeshua. The important element are the vowels. Einai, which means being, also has a value of 13. In Hebrew, one of the forms of the name Yeshua is found in the book of Joshua, the prophet Joshua, successor of Moshe, and has a value of 13, 391. We sum up each cipher and we get 13. There is another form of Joshua with an additional Bab. It's found in that book of Joshua as well. And when we sum up that name with Amashiach, Yehoshua, Amashiach, we get again 760, which gives 13. And as I've said many times, Echad has a value of 13, and it means unicity, as well as Ahava, love. Therefore, the number 13 is contained in sacred names, and they are associated to the anointed one, which we must manifest in order to express the divine birth. And this was not hidden, this truth was always open, but something was interrupted, and this is what we find in incomplete representations of the tree of life. You'll find that Sephirotic tree many times depicted in the middle of the flower of life, but always with this sphere missing. And we also find it in the so-called Hebrew menorah with 7 arms. There you have the tree of life in the middle, but this is an incomplete representation. In reality, this is the transversal section of 3 spheres, one within each other. Those 3 spheres would be the manifestation of the 3 bodies. And curiously, according to Plato, this was the structure of the famous Atlantis that was destroyed because it was a civilization based on the development of spiritual technology, but they became very dominant. Actually, Atlantis was one of the headquarters of one of the so-called gods that ruled the earth. They divided the earth in 12 sections, and one was the civilization of Atlantis, in which there were 12 priests, but they all were ruled by the so-called god Poseidon. In my opinion, it was a type of man, self-proclaimed god, and his symbol was the trident, which actually you can find in the middle of the menorah. And this trident represents, in my opinion, the false love, false conscience, which would be the technological knowledge, the accumulation of external data, and the false soul, the false personality developed by people. And this is how society was ruled, not only then, but also nowadays. Therefore, we must understand how to develop love by expanding our conscience and growing in personality, individuality, divine soul. And this is actually what we see mirrored in another ancient diagram known as the Enneagram, where you can see the vector of energy 936. Actually, this is a representation of all symbols. It was brought into the West by a master of dances and composer known as Georg Ivanovich Gurdjieff. And unfortunately, nowadays this symbol is misused by different organizations, especially to teach theories about personality types. And I have seen that those theories do not mirror the wisdom of Harmonia. They are not based on the true flow of the Tree of Lives. Therefore, we must understand this from its foundation. Anyway, I leave this for the following day. But meanwhile, notice how the central column in the Tree of Life contains those three numbers, and this is the completion of the three octaves. Watch the video The Octaves of Consciousness, in which I introduce this theme, the Law of Seven, in which there is a semitone missing between Mi and Fa, as well as between Si and Do. Missing semitone that has to be introduced earlier. But as I say, let's continue the following day. We'll also see that this symbol can be used even for teaching music and composing. Actually, the melody that you heard in the beginning was a composition that I'm developing based on this symbol. But for now, we already have many important ideas to ponder, so we can develop the true love, conscience and soul to express our individual personality, which is an expression of the Holy One. Therefore, until the next week, blessings of true love, life, conscience and infinite serenity.